We live in a culture that equates masculinity with dominance, silence, and invulnerability. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Real strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about being accountable. We've all heard it. Maybe we've even said it ourselves. That's just how I am. It sounds harmless, even honest, but let's call it what it really is: a wall, a defense mechanism dressed up as self-awareness, a sentence we use to shut down conversations that ask us to grow. Because when we say that's just how I am, what we're actually saying is, don't ask me to reflect. Don't challenge me to be better. Don't expect me to change because I've decided I don't have to. It's not a declaration of identity, it's a declaration of surrender. It's giving up the responsibility of becoming and instead clinging to the comfort of who we've always been, even if who we've always been is hurting the people around us. But here's the truth that takes real courage to face. We are not born emotionally shut down. We are not hardwired to be reactive, dismissive, cold, aggressive, manipulative, or avoidant. Those are patterns, coping strategies, survival mechanisms we picked up along the way to feel safe in a world that told us vulnerability was dangerous. And guess what? Patterns can be unlearned. That's just how I am often comes from a man who was never taught that evolution is possible, that healing is a choice, that self-awareness is a muscle, that change is a form of love, not weakness. So instead of saying, that's just how I am, ask, is this who I want to be? Is this belief still serving me, or is it just familiar? Am I hiding behind who I've been because I'm afraid of who I could become? We don't get to use our past as an excuse to avoid accountability. Yes, your story matters, your trauma matters, the way you were shaped by life, it all matters, but none of it gives you a free pass to opt out of your own growth. Men who are truly strong aren't the ones who double down on dysfunction. They're the ones who face it with humility, with honesty, and with a willingness to transform. Just how I am might be where you started. Doesn't have to be where you stay. It's a phrase that cuts deeper than most insults because it doesn't just question someone's feelings, it invalidates their right to feel at all. Let's get one thing straight. Telling someone they're too sensitive isn't feedback. It's dismissal, it's a defense mechanism, it's an emotionally lazy way of saying, your feelings are uncomfortable for me, so I'm gonna make them your problem. It's not strength, it's avoidance. When a man says this, especially in relationships, especially during conflict, it almost always comes from one of two places: fear or discomfort. Fear of being held accountable, discomfort with being asked to face something he'd rather ignore. But let's look at what's really happening underneath. When someone expresses hurt, disappointment, or even just vulnerability, it takes courage. And when we respond with, you're too sensitive, we shut that courage down. We teach people to doubt themselves, to quiet their truth, to carry their pain silently so we don't have to witness it. And often the person who says it, he's not actually strong enough yet to sit with someone else's emotion without feeling personally attacked. He hasn't yet learned that holding space for another person's truth doesn't mean surrendering his own. It just means listening without trying to control the narrative. And here's where it gets real. Calling someone too sensitive often reveals just how emotionally underdeveloped the speaker really is. Sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is not fragility. Sensitivity is awareness, it's attunement, it's the ability to feel the nuances of life and relationships with depth and care. The truth is, we need more sensitivity in this world, not less. We need men who are emotionally literate, who can recognize and honor the impact of their words, who understand that their tone carries weight, their silences have meaning, and their actions echo far beyond the moment. Telling someone they're too sensitive is like breaking a glass and blaming the floor for being hard. It shifts blame, it denies reality, it protects ego at the cost of connection. If you've said this before, and many of us have, pause and ask yourself, what was I trying to avoid? Why did their emotion feel threatening to me? What would it look like to respond with curiosity instead of criticism? Because the truth is, when someone shares their pain with us, they're not being weak. They're offering us an invitation to see them, to understand them, to meet them in a place of truth. And how we respond tells them everything about who we really are. If we want to be strong men, truly strong, we have to stop using shame to silence softness. But let's stop telling people they feel too much and start asking ourselves why we feel so little. It's one of the most damaging lies we've ever told our boys. And it's not just a lie, it's a cage. It's a message hammered into us from the time we can walk. Don't cry, don't feel, don't be soft, and if you do, do it quietly, privately, behind locked doors, because God forbid someone sees the cracks in your armor. But here's what no one tells you. That armor, it becomes a prison. We convince men that tears are a weakness, that emotion is a threat to masculinity, that grief, tenderness, hurt, fear, these are feelings for women, for children, for lesser men. And so what happens? We raise men who don't know how to grieve. We raise men who rage instead of cry. We raise men who bury everything they can't explain and then watch it come out sideways in addiction, in anger, in silence, in self-destruction. Men who were never taught how to cry end up bleeding emotionally on the people who love them most. And the tragedy is they think they're being strong. They think holding it in is noble, stoic, manly. But the strongest men I've ever met, the ones who lead with integrity, who show up with full hearts, who carry others when they're falling apart, those men cry, and not because they're broken, because they're brave enough to feel. Because tears don't make you weak, pretending nothing hurts, that does. Here's the truth. Real men cry. Real men mourn the losses they've been told to man up through. Real men cry at the birth of their children, at the loss of their fathers, at the ending of a relationship, or the weight of a mistake. Real men cry because their hearts are open, not because they've failed at being tough. And those tears, they cleanse, they free, they heal. They give permission to others, sons, brothers, friends, to stop pretending and start living. So to every man who's ever swallowed his emotion like poison to prove a point, you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to grit your teeth through heartbreak. You don't have to toughen up your way through grief. You don't have to be a statue when life knocks you to your knees. Your softness is not your failure. It is your humanity. We don't need men who can fake indifference. We need men who can feel deeply and still keep moving forward. Not despite their tears, but with them. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is cry, but look a little closer. And it's not strength, it's stagnation. It's fear disguised as certainty, and it's often the loudest voice of the man who is terrified of being wrong. Because if you already know everything you need to know, guess what that means? You don't have to listen. You don't have to learn. You don't have to grow. This phrase is a closed door. It shuts out conversation. It shuts out reflection. And worst of all, it shuts out humility. When a man says this, what he's really doing is protecting his ego at all costs. He's drawing a line around himself, saying, this is all I'll ever be, and I'm not open to becoming anything more. And that might feel powerful in the moment, but over time, it's a slow death of potential. Let's be real. Men who claim to know everything they need to know are usually afraid of being exposed, afraid of feeling inadequate. So they create this illusion of certainty. They live in absolutes. They stop asking questions. They mistake arrogance for leadership. And it isolates them. It keeps them stuck in outdated ideas. It damages relationships because you can't truly connect with someone when you're always trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. And it robs them of growth because growth requires admitting that there's always more to understand. The strongest men aren't the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who stay curious, who ask questions even when they're afraid of the answers, who understand that knowledge isn't a destination, it's a lifelong pursuit. They don't cling to being right, they cling to being real. Because real growth, it's uncomfortable. It requires unlearning. It requires owning your blind spots, your biases, your conditioning. It requires saying, maybe I got this wrong. Maybe there's more for me to learn. And let's be honest, how many relationships, friendships, opportunities, and inner peace have been lost simply because someone refused to be teachable? Saying, I know everything I need to know might feel like power, but in the end, it's limitation. Dangerous place a man can live is in the belief that he's done learning. So if you've said this before, here's the invitation. Trade your need to be right for the courage to be open. Because you don't have to know everything. You just have to be brave enough to keep learning. First glance, it sounds like a principle, a code, something a man might say with a straight back and a firm tone, believing he is upholding a standard. But what it really is a mask for fear, a mask for ego, a mask for entitlement and superiority. Let's be honest about what this phrase really does. It justifies disrespect. It normalizes power imbalances. And it reveals more about the man who says it than the woman it's aimed at. Because when a man says respect is earned, not given, especially to women, he is almost always trying to avoid accountability. He's using the concept of earned respect as a weapon, treating dignity like it's a prize instead of a birthright. But here's the truth. Respect is not a reward, it's a reflection of your character. You don't respect people because they performed for you. You respect people because you've decided that who you are doesn't change based on who they are. When you withhold basic respect, especially from women, because they haven't met your criteria, what you're really saying is, I only see value in people when they benefit me, agree with me, or serve me. That's not strength. That's control. That's not standards. That's supremacy. That's not leadership. That's insecurity performing as pride. Let's talk about the double standard here too. You rarely hear this phrase aimed at men. It's rarely, he has to earn my respect. So men often extend default respect to each other even in conflict. But when it comes to women, suddenly the bar is higher. Suddenly she has to prove herself, submit, stay quiet, earn her place. That's not respect, that's conditioning. That's patriarchy. That's fear of losing power disguised as principle. So here's the reframe. Respecting someone doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you like them. It doesn't mean you trust them with your life. It simply means you recognize their humanity and treat them accordingly. And if a man's default is to withhold respect from half the population based on gender, that's not about standards, that's about superiority. The strongest men I know respect women because they respect themselves. They don't need a woman to earn her dignity. They don't need agreement to offer kindness. They don't need submission to offer decency, because their respect isn't a currency they trade. It's a reflection of the integrity they live by. So if you've ever said respect is earned, not given, especially to women, pause and ask, what am I protecting by withholding respect? What am I afraid to lose if I offer dignity freely? Is this about her worth or my insecurity? The world doesn't need more men who are willing to judge. We need more men who are willing to unlearn Because when we begin offering respect without conditions, we create space for equity, trust, and real leadership, not just power plays in the name of standards. And that's the kind of manhood worth earning. It sounds bold, doesn't it? Fearless, free, like the words of a man who walks through life untouched by judgment, immune to opinion, bulletproof in his truth. But if you look closely, if you really listen to the tone behind it, it's rarely freedom speaking. Most of the time, it's pain in disguise. It's not a declaration of independence. It's a defense mechanism, a wall built not from confidence, but from wounds, from betrayal, from criticism, from years of not feeling seen, respected, or understood. So we learn to shut it all down. We pretend we don't care. We train ourselves to go numb, and we wear that numbness like armor, calling it strength. But here's what no one tells you. You were never meant to stop caring, because not caring what people think isn't strength. It's disconnection. It's not courage, it's avoidance. Caring what people think is human. It's how we form bonds. It's how we grow. It's how we know we belong somewhere, that our presence has impact, that we matter. But here's the catch. Caring what people think isn't the problem. The problem is needing their approval to validate your worth. The problem is living for their applause instead of listening to your own inner compass. There's a difference between being a prisoner to people's opinions and being aware of how your presence affects the room. One is codependence. The other is emotional intelligence. Men who walk around shouting, "I don't care what people think," are often just trying to hide the fact that they've been hurt too many times to risk vulnerability again. They're tired of being misunderstood. They're tired of being judged. So they decide it's safer to stop caring altogether. But that's not strength, that's trauma. And the cost of that mindset, it's steep. You stop listening, you stop connecting, you stop being teachable, you stop being emotionally available to the people who need your care. And here's the hard truth, a man who truly doesn't care what people think can't be a good partner or a good leader or a good friend, because caring is part of relationship. It's how we build trust, it's how we build anything that lasts. So instead of, "I don't care what people think," what if we said, "I care what people think, but I don't let it control me. I'm open to feedback, but not defined by it. I value connection, but not at the cost of my integrity." That's real strength. The goal isn't to go numb, it's to be discerning, to care where it matters, to listen when it's wise, to stand tall even when you're misunderstood, not because you don't care, but because you know who you are. That's the kind of strength we need more of. Not men who hide behind apathy, but men who care deeply and live freely anyway. We've been handed a script, one that told us that strength means silence, that confidence means never questioning ourselves, that masculinity means power at all costs. And we followed it. We armored up, we shut down. We repeated these 6 phrases like mantras. That's just how I am. You're too sensitive. Real men don't cry. I know everything I need to know. Respect is earned, not given, especially to women. I don't care what people think. But here's the truth. Every single one of these phrases reveals not strength, but fear. Fear of being challenged. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of being seen. Fear of losing control. And real strength, the kind that builds trust, intimacy, leadership, legacy, doesn't come from being unbreakable. It comes from being real, from being able to say, "I'm still learning. That hurt me. I want to understand. I care. I was wrong. I can grow." True masculinity isn't built on bravado. It's built on courage. Courage to show up honestly. Courage to own your impact. Courage to choose empathy over ego. So if you've used these phrases before, you're not broken, you're human, but now you have a choice to keep repeating the story that shrinks you, or to write a new one that expands you. Because the world doesn't need more men who act tough. It needs more men who are brave enough to be tender, bold enough to evolve, and strong enough to lead with heart. Let's retire the old scripts. Let's stop mistaking control for power. Let's stop calling emotional numbness strength. And let's start creating a version of manhood that's rooted in truth, wholeness, and connection. That's how we rise. Would you like me to now write the description, timestamps, or hashtags for this video or speech?
Let's talk about something that hurts deeper than we like to admit, being humiliated in front of others. We've all been there, a meeting, a family gathering, a classroom, a comment, a joke, a glance, and just like that, the ground beneath you disappears. You shrink, not just in size, but in worth, or at least that's what it feels like in the moment. Shame, in its rawest form, is a deeply human emotion. It's the feeling that tells us we are unworthy of love, connection, or belonging. It's not guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. That distinction matters because shame doesn't just critique our behavior, it attacks our identity. Now, in the hands of emotionally mature people, shame is something to be acknowledged, processed, and healed. But in the hands of the insecure, in the hands of those who haven't yet made peace with their own worth, shame becomes a weapon. It's a power tool. Because if I can make you feel small, maybe, just maybe, I won't feel so small myself. If I can make you the target, then for a moment, I get to stand on higher ground. Not real ground, not solid ground, but it feels like power. That's the illusion of shame as a weapon. People who humiliate others in front of everyone are often deeply uncomfortable with their own sense of inadequacy. But instead of sitting with that discomfort, instead of doing the hard and holy work of healing, they externalize their pain. They broadcast it, they pass it on like a hot coal. If they can't drop it, they'll throw it at you. And here's the twisted part. It works. Shame sticks, especially when it's delivered publicly. It silences. It isolates. It cuts deep into our most fragile parts. So when someone misuses shame to control a room or dominate a conversation, it's not just about you, it's about them trying to manage their own fear of being insignificant. Insecurity, when left unchecked, doesn't just wound the person who carries it, it spills out and wounds others too. And humiliation becomes a shortcut to false power. But that kind of power, it's cheap. It's brittle, it doesn't last. Real power, grounded, authentic, and courageous power, never needs to shame someone else to feel seen. So the next time someone tries to wield shame in your direction, remember, they're not showing strength. They're showing a wound they haven't dared to name. When someone chooses to humiliate another person, especially in front of an audience, it's rarely about the person being targeted. It's often an act of emotional misdirection, like a magician's sleight of hand. Don't look at what's broken in me. Let me make you feel broken instead. We all carry pain. Some of it is old and hidden, buried under years of pretending. Some of it is fresh and sharp, sitting right under the surface of our daily lives. That pain might come from rejection, trauma, abandonment, betrayal, the kind of wounds that make us feel unsafe, unworthy, unseen. But not everyone knows how to sit with pain. Not everyone knows how to feel it without needing to offload it. Because pain that isn't processed doesn't go away, it gets passed on. And one of the quickest, most destructive ways people pass on their pain is through humiliation. Humiliating someone else can feel like relief to someone who is drowning in their own suffering. It creates a temporary illusion of control. If I can make you squirm, I don't have to feel my own discomfort. It diverts the emotional spotlight. It silences the voice inside them saying, "You're not enough," by forcing someone else to carry that message instead. Think about the co-worker who points out your mistake in front of the whole team, not to help, but to shame. Or the parent who mocks a child instead of supporting them. Or the partner who turns a vulnerable moment into a punchline. These aren't just acts of cruelty, they're acts of emotional deflection. Because if they stop and look too closely at themselves, at the grief, at the shame, at the fear it might be too much to bear, so instead they project it. They make you the mirror of what they can't face in themselves. But here's what's powerful to remember. Their pain is not your burden to carry. It doesn't matter how loudly they speak, how many people are in the room, or how sharp their words may be that pain belongs to them. And while it's human to want to defend yourself or to internalize the message, your healing comes from a different choice, the choice to not absorb what was never yours to begin with. Humiliation is never a justified response to pain. It's a sign of emotional immaturity, of unhealed wounds that are being weaponized. But you can break that cycle. You can hold your dignity even in the face of their deflection. You can say, "This is not about me," and walk away from the fire without carrying the burn. At the heart of most public humiliation lies a silent but powerful intention: control. Let's be clear, connection is about mutual respect, vulnerability, and truth. It's the willingness to be seen as we are and to see others in their fullness. Control is the opposite. Control is rooted in fear, in scarcity, in the belief that dominance is safer than intimacy. So when someone humiliates you in front of others, it's rarely a spontaneous accident. Even if it looks casual, a sarcastic comment, a joke at your expense, a condescending correction, it's often a calculated move, whether they realize it or not. It's designed to reclaim power, to establish hierarchy, to say without words, "I'm in charge here, not you." Why would someone choose control over connection? Because connection requires vulnerability, and for some people, vulnerability feels like weakness. If they've grown up in environments where love was conditional, where power dynamics ruled relationships, or where showing emotion meant being dismissed or punished, then control becomes a survival mechanism. They learn that it's better to be feared than to be seen, that it's safer to dominate than to be honest. So when they're feeling uncertain, insecure, or emotionally exposed, they reach for control, and humiliation becomes the easiest tool in reach. Humiliating someone in front of others disrupts the emotional balance of the room. It silences dissent. It creates a false sense of superiority. It makes everyone a little more afraid to speak freely, and that fear is mistaken for respect. But don't confuse silence with connection. Don't mistake obedience for relationship. Control doesn't foster trust, it breaks it. And the irony is, people who reach for control in this way are often the loneliest. They desperately want to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, but they've been taught that to get those things, they have to manipulate others into giving them. That's a heartbreaking way to live, because it's not real belonging. It's a performance, and it comes at the expense of real intimacy. But here's the good news: you don't have to play that game. You don't have to trade your integrity for approval or your voice for peace. You can choose connection even when someone else chooses control. You can set boundaries without becoming bitter. You can walk away without losing yourself. And in doing so, you remind others and yourself that real power is not about making others feel small. Real power is the courage to show up, be seen, and still choose love over fear. Some people weaponize vulnerability instead of honoring it. Vulnerability is sacred. It's the part of us that says, "Here I am," without the armor. It's the trembling truth beneath our strength, the courage to let someone see what we usually hide. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's the most human, most courageous act we can offer in a world that constantly tells us to be tougher, quieter, smaller. But here's the painful truth: not everyone knows how to hold that kind of courage with care. Some people see vulnerability not as an invitation to connect, but as an opportunity to control, to mock, or to wound. You open up about your anxiety, and they turn it into a punchline. You admit a mistake, and they use it to discredit you. You share a dream, and they scoff at it in front of others. That is what it looks like when someone weaponizes vulnerability, when they take something raw and tender and turn it into ammunition. And it cuts deeper than most forms of harm because it breaks an unspoken social contract. If I let you see me, will you be kind? When someone chooses to exploit your openness, it reveals more about their relationship with their own vulnerability than it does about you. Because people who are at peace with their own imperfections don't ridicule others for showing theirs. People who know how to sit with their own shame don't need to project it. People who have healed don't harm others for bleeding. Weaponizing vulnerability is a strategy rooted in fear and disconnection. It's often used by those who don't feel safe enough to be seen themselves, so instead, they punish others for doing what they cannot. They mistake your bravery for foolishness because they've never been taught that softness can be strong. But make no mistake, you are not foolish for opening up. You are not weak for being real. You are human, and your vulnerability is not the problem. The problem is a world that hasn't yet learned how to hold softness without exploiting it. So, how do you protect your vulnerability without closing it off completely? You get discerning. You listen to your gut when it says, "This person hasn't earned that part of me yet." You stop over-explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You remember that vulnerability is something to be shared, not proved. And most importantly, you don't let someone else's cruelty convince you that your openness was a mistake. Because every time you choose to be real in a world that celebrates the fake, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. You remind yourself, and maybe even someone watching, that it's okay to be human, that it's okay to not be perfect, that being seen is worth the risk. There's a reason so many people choose to project instead of taking responsibility, because accountability is hard and projection is easy. Let's break this down. Accountability requires you to pause, reflect, admit, and sometimes apologize. It asks you to sit with the discomfort of your own imperfections, to acknowledge your role in what went wrong. It means confronting the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore: the insecurity, the jealousy, the defensiveness, the fear. That takes self-awareness. That takes emotional maturity. And above all, that takes courage. Projection, on the other hand, is a fast exit. It's a shortcut away from self-examination. It's easier to say, "You're the problem," than it is to whisper, "Maybe it's me." So when someone humiliates you in front of others, what they're often doing is offloading their own emotional discomfort. Maybe they're angry, insecure, ashamed, or overwhelmed. Instead of owning that pain and processing it, they toss it like a hot potato right at you. They might be afraid of seeming incompetent, so they criticize you for being unprepared. They might feel overlooked, so they draw attention by putting you down. They might be battling imposter syndrome, so they mock your confidence to quiet their own self-doubt. It's easier to call someone else too sensitive than to admit you were unkind. It's easier to say someone can't take a joke than to own that what you said wasn't funny, it was hurtful. It's easier to pick apart someone else's flaws than to face the terrifying truth that we all have things we need to work on. Projection is a defense mechanism. It protects the fragile ego. It delays the inner work, but it comes at a cost, a steep one, because while projection may shield someone from momentary discomfort, it disconnects them from their own growth. It damages relationships. It teaches people that blame is a safer home than honesty. But what about you, the person on the receiving end? The trap is internalizing their projection, believing that what they're throwing at you belongs to you. So you start shrinking. You second guess yourself. You ask, was I wrong? Did I deserve that? Am I really too much? Let me tell you something clearly. You are not their unprocessed emotion. You are not their shame. You are not their anxiety. You are not the container for what they refuse to feel. What you are is a mirror, and sometimes people don't like what they see in a mirror, so they try to break it instead of facing themselves. The good news: you don't have to carry what was never yours. Accountability is always the higher road, and it's a road you can walk whether they do or not. You can name your truth without naming theirs. You can keep your heart soft without letting someone else's projection harden it. And you can say, "I see what's happening here, and I refuse to be your scapegoat." That's not cold. That's not unkind. That's boundaries, and boundaries are what protect your emotional clarity in the face of someone else's refusal to do their own work. Let's talk about the messages we've been taught not just by individuals, but by the world around us. Many of us were raised in cultures, workplaces, families, or communities where cruelty wasn't just tolerated, it was rewarded, where sharp tongues were praised as wit, where dominance was mistaken for leadership, and where emotional detachment was held up as a badge of honor. From a young age, we're often told directly or indirectly that to succeed, we need to toughen up, grow thicker skin, stop being so sensitive, and never show weakness. And when someone humiliates another person publicly, instead of being called out for cruelty, they're sometimes applauded, laughed with, promoted, put in charge, because somewhere along the way, we started confusing meanness with strength. Think about it. The boss who belittles their team and gets labeled efficient. The celebrity who mocks others online and gets called bold. The classmate who tears someone down with sarcasm and gets a laugh from the room. Cruelty, dressed up in confidence, becomes a form of social currency, and we learn to look the other way, to excuse it, especially if it's coming from someone with power, popularity, or charisma. We say things like, "That's just how they are," or "They don't mean anything by it," or "You need to be able to take it." But here's the truth. There's nothing strong about tearing someone down. There's nothing brave about embarrassing someone to prove a point. There's nothing noble about humiliating others to get ahead. Real strength doesn't degrade, it dignifies. Real leadership doesn't humiliate, it humbles. The tragedy is that this cultural confusion creates deep harm. It makes people afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to speak up, afraid to ask for help. It teaches us to wear masks and build walls instead of cultivating courage and compassion. And when someone is cruel, when they humiliate someone else, our culture too often gives them a round of applause instead of a moment of accountability. Why? Because cruelty is loud, it's showy, it dominates a room. And sometimes people mistake that for confidence, but it's not. It's performative power, it's fear in costume, and when the world keeps rewarding it, the cycle continues. People learn that they can control others by making them feel small, and that instead of being called out, they'll be called strong. But here's the revolution, and it is a revolution in a world like this. Kindness with a spine, compassion with boundaries, vulnerability without apology. Those are not soft traits. They are powerful practices. They are how we begin to rewrite the norms. Because when you stand up and say, "Cruelty isn't strength," and "silence isn't peace," you begin to shift the culture in your team, in your family, in your community. And when someone humiliates you and calls it tough love or just being real, you have every right to name what it is, a distortion of strength. And then you can choose not to carry it. You can choose to be the kind of strong the world actually needs, the kind that doesn't come at someone else's expense. Humiliation is not about truth, it's about power. It's about people who haven't yet done the work to face their own pain, who reach for control when connection feels too risky, who weaponize vulnerability because they haven't learned how to honor it, who project their discomfort onto others because accountability feels like too heavy a mirror. And often, far too often, the world rewards that behavior. It calls it strong, decisive, bold, but cruelty isn't bold, it's afraid, and no amount of laughter, applause, or awkward silence in the room changes that. Here's what I want you to hear in your bones. You are not the humiliation. You are not the moment someone tried to define you by your worst mistake, your most tender truth, or your human imperfection. You are the strength it takes to keep showing up after someone tried to knock the wind out of you. You are the courage to keep your heart open in a world that teaches people to armor up. You are the clarity to see through someone else's projection and say, "That's not mine to carry." When people humiliate, they are trying to make someone else pay the price for wounds they've refused to heal. But your worth is not up for debate. Not in a meeting, not at a dinner table, not in a classroom, not in any room where someone chooses cruelty over courage. So, we reclaim that space. We choose to speak up when silence protects harm. We choose to soften where others harden. We choose to protect our boundaries without becoming bitter. And we choose to believe, no matter how many times we've been told otherwise, that real strength is always rooted in dignity, not dominance. That's how we change the culture, one honest, courageous, heart-led conversation at a time.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. We often hear the term stupid used to describe people, but what does it really mean? How do we distinguish those who might be acting thoughtlessly or lacking wisdom from those who are simply uninformed or misunderstood? Today, I want to explore the subtle but clear signs that may point to a lack of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and basic reasoning. And let me clarify, this isn't about intelligence in the traditional sense. Instead, this is about the choices people make and how they engage with the world around them. One of the most telling signs of emotional immaturity or lack of wisdom is an individual's constant defensiveness. Defensiveness isn't just about the occasional reaction to a criticism or feedback. It's a recurring pattern of behavior that speaks volumes about a person's inability to handle vulnerability or reflect on their actions. When someone becomes defensive at every opportunity, whether it's in response to a constructive comment, a suggestion for improvement, or even a casual observation, they reveal an underlying discomfort with themselves and their self-image. At the heart of this defensiveness is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of looking weak, fear of being judged. When someone is unable to engage in open dialogue and is constantly on the defensive, it's often because they have not yet developed the emotional resilience required to confront their own mistakes, flaws, or limitations. Instead of being open to learning or reflection, they turn inward, using their defensiveness as a shield to protect their fragile sense of self-worth. Think about it, emotional defensiveness often manifests as denial or argument. Instead of saying, I see where you're coming from, let me think about that, the defensive person will dismiss the feedback altogether, insisting that they're right or that there's something wrong with the person offering the critique. It's as if they view criticism or differing opinions as personal attacks rather than opportunities for growth. They might interrupt or deflect, dismissing the feelings or views of others in favor of preserving their own version of the truth. This type of behavior is detrimental not just to the individual, but to their relationships as well. Healthy communication requires vulnerability, the ability to sit with discomfort and reflect on how our actions affect others. A defensive person, however, often shuts down communication by avoiding emotional risk. Over time, this can erode trust, create distance in relationships, and result in a lack of mutual respect. Without the willingness to engage in constructive dialogue, the person remains isolated in their own version of reality, unable to gain the insights that come with openness and honesty. Furthermore, defensiveness often prevents personal growth. When someone refuses to accept responsibility for their actions or acknowledge their shortcomings, they miss out on the opportunity to change. Growth is impossible without self-awareness, and self-awareness is impossible if we remain trapped in a coil of denial and defensiveness. If a person cannot sit with the discomfort of being wrong, how will they ever learn from their mistakes? How can they evolve into a more thoughtful, considerate person? An emotionally resilient person, on the other hand, understands that defensiveness is a natural reaction, but also knows that it can be overcome. Rather than responding impulsively, they take a step back, process the information, and allow themselves the space to reflect. They embrace the discomfort of vulnerability and use it as fuel for growth. They recognize that admitting fault does not diminish their value, but rather strengthens their character and deepens their relationships. One of the most destructive and pervasive signs of emotional immaturity is a person's tendency to consistently blame others or external circumstances for their problems. Blaming others isn't just a small mistake or occasional reflex. It's a deep-seated pattern of behavior that reveals an unwillingness to take responsibility for one's own actions and decisions. This mindset doesn't just hinder personal growth, it can poison relationships, limit professional success, and prevent any meaningful progress in life. At its core, blame culture is a defense mechanism, a way for individuals to deflect responsibility and avoid facing uncomfortable truths about their own behavior or choices. When someone is constantly pointing fingers at others, it's often because they're unwilling to look inward and acknowledge their role in a situation. It's much easier to accuse others or external forces, whether it's the government, colleagues, friends, or even the universe, than it is to confront one's own weaknesses or mistakes. This behavior often stems from an intense fear of being judged or criticized, a fear that leads the individual to protect their ego at all costs. By blaming others, they temporarily shield themselves from guilt, shame, or the discomfort that comes with admitting fault. But this culture of blame isn't just about avoiding personal responsibility, it's also about a refusal to learn from mistakes. When a person consistently blames others, they are essentially telling themselves that they are powerless, that they have no control over their own actions or the outcomes they face. This mindset creates a cycle of helplessness, where the individual feels stuck, always at the mercy of external forces, never able to break free and take charge of their own destiny. Rather than seeing mistakes or failures as opportunities to grow, they view them as something to avoid at all costs, and thus they avoid any real self-reflection or self-improvement. This constant shifting of blame also has far-reaching consequences on relationships. Think about how exhausting it is to be around someone who never owns up to their mistakes. If you've ever been in a relationship with someone who can never admit they're wrong, you know how difficult it can be to have an honest dialogue. Conversations become one-sided, and trust slowly erodes. When we're constantly met with excuses and deflections, it's impossible to build a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The relationship becomes a battlefield rather than a partnership, where one person is always trying to justify themselves and the other is always playing the role of the accuser. The same dynamic occurs in professional settings, where blame culture can destroy teamwork, stifle innovation, and prevent companies from reaching their full potential. In workplaces where blame is the go-to response, employees are less likely to take initiative or risk trying new approaches for fear of being criticized or penalized if things go wrong. Instead of collaborating to find solutions, the focus shifts to protecting individual reputations and avoiding responsibility. This creates an environment where no one wants to take accountability, which ultimately leads to stagnation and missed opportunities. Furthermore, blame culture often fosters a toxic environment of finger-pointing and negativity. It becomes a cycle of accusations where everyone is so focused on finding someone else to blame that they never get to the root of the problem. This type of atmosphere breeds resentment, division, and frustration, leaving everyone involved feeling disempowered. Instead of working together to solve challenges, people retreat into their own corners, feeling alienated and misunderstood. However, the real damage caused by blame culture is the missed opportunity for growth. Growth only happens when we take full responsibility for our actions. When we stop blaming others, we can begin to learn from our mistakes and make better choices in the future. Taking responsibility doesn't mean we accept all the blame for every situation, nor does it mean that we are always at fault. But it does mean that we look at the situation honestly, acknowledge our role in it, and take proactive steps to improve. This shift in perspective requires maturity and emotional intelligence. It demands the courage to say, I made a mistake, or I could have handled that better. It requires the ability to look at challenges from a place of reflection rather than defensiveness. This attitude of ownership is empowering. It frees individuals from the shackles of blame and allows them to take control of their own narrative, learning and evolving along the way. In a society that encourages blame, it's easy to feel justified in pointing fingers at others when things go wrong. But it's important to remember that the greatest power we have in life is the ability to control how we respond. Taking responsibility is not about perfection, it's about progress. It's about developing the emotional maturity to understand that we are all human, that we will make mistakes, but that we always have the choice to learn, grow, and do better. By breaking free from the cycle of blame, we can create a culture of accountability, growth, and self-awareness, one that fosters healthier relationships, stronger communities, and more resilient individuals. When we embrace responsibility, we take the first step toward transforming our lives into something meaningful and impactful. One of the most telling signs of emotional or intellectual immaturity is the inability to change one's mind when presented with clear evidence to the contrary. This stubbornness or refusal to accept new facts can be one of the most detrimental behaviors, both for personal development and for relationships with others. When a person is confronted with overwhelming proof, whether it's in the form of logical argument, scientific data, or real-life experience, and still refuses to budge from their position, it's a clear indication that something deeper is at play. At first glance, stubbornness might seem like a mere personality trait, something as simple as a strong-willed individual sticking to their guns. But when this trait is present in the face of clear evidence, it is not a sign of strength, it is a sign of intellectual rigidity and an inability to engage with the world in a flexible, open-minded way. The person who refuses to reconsider their position even when confronted with new information is essentially saying that their beliefs and opinions are more important than the truth. They might be willing to sacrifice progress, growth, and relationships to protect their own ego or pride. What often drives this stubbornness is the fear of being wrong. Being wrong can feel like a blow to one's self-esteem. It requires vulnerability and the willingness to accept that our understanding of the world is flawed or incomplete. For some individuals, the discomfort of being wrong outweighs the opportunity to learn, grow, and adjust their worldview. They'd rather cling to a belief even when the evidence clearly shows they are mistaken, because admitting they are wrong feels too threatening. It's as if the act of changing their mind would invalidate their entire identity or personal history. However, this resistance to change is more than just fear. It can also be rooted in cognitive biases, which are the mental shortcuts our brains use to process information quickly, but can often lead us astray. Confirmation bias, for instance, causes individuals to selectively search for and interpret information in a way that confirms their pre-existing beliefs, disregarding anything that challenges their view. Once someone has formed an opinion or belief, they may only seek out evidence that supports it and ignore anything that contradicts it, thus reinforcing their stubbornness. This intellectual rigidity is often magnified in environments where pride, social status, or identity are tied to particular beliefs. Think of people who identify strongly with a political party, religion, or ideology. For many, these identities are so closely intertwined with their self-worth that changing their mind feels like a betrayal of who they are. As a result, they may become hyper-defensive when their beliefs are challenged, unable to see that shifting one's perspective can be a natural and healthy part of personal growth. The effects of this stubbornness are far-reaching. On a personal level, refusing to accept new evidence limits an individual's capacity for growth and learning. We live in an ever-changing world, and one of the most important skills we can cultivate is adaptability, the ability to adjust our views based on new information and experiences. Stubbornness in the face of evidence prevents this. The more someone clings to outdated or incorrect beliefs, the less open they are to new ideas, and the less likely they are to evolve as a person. This can make it difficult for them to thrive in a world that requires critical thinking, flexibility, and ongoing education. In relationships, this behavior can create significant tension and frustration. Think about how difficult it is to communicate with someone who refuses to acknowledge any perspective other than their own. Conversations become a battleground, with each side trying to convince the other of their rightness instead of engaging in meaningful dialogue. Trust and mutual respect are undermined because the person who is stubborn is seen as closed off, uninterested in understanding others, and unwilling to engage with the complexity of the world. Relationships are built on the ability to listen, empathize, and adapt, traits that are sorely lacking when someone is stubborn in the face of evidence. Furthermore, stubbornness can have professional consequences in a workplace or collaborative environment. Being open to new ideas and willing to adapt to change is essential for success. Stubbornness often leads to missed opportunities, whether it's resisting new technology, clinging to outdated methods, or failing to acknowledge problems that need addressing. In teams, when one person refuses to consider alternatives, it can halt progress and create a toxic work environment where innovation is stifled. Leaders who are stubborn in their decision-making risk alienating their teams, as those around them will feel like their input is irrelevant. This undermines morale, creativity, and productivity. Perhaps most importantly, when individuals are stubborn in the face of evidence, they lose the opportunity to experience the power of intellectual humility. Intellectual humility is the recognition that our understanding of the world is always limited and that we are constantly learning and evolving. Those who lack this humility often miss the transformative power of being open to new ideas, perspectives, and evidence. It's through humility that we can grow wiser, become better problem solvers, and build more meaningful connections with others. Changing one's mind doesn't make someone weak, it makes them wise. It shows an openness to learning, an understanding that no one has all the answers, and a commitment to truth over ego. It takes strength to admit when we're wrong and to adjust our views accordingly. The willingness to learn from new evidence is one of the most powerful ways we can continue to evolve as individuals and as a society. When we embrace this flexibility, we allow ourselves to break free from the chains of stubbornness and move toward greater understanding and progress. Empathy is often described as the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It is one of the most crucial aspects of emotional intelligence, enabling us to form meaningful relationships, work collaboratively, and navigate the complexities of human interaction. Without empathy, a person may struggle to connect with others on a deeper level, leading to a range of issues in personal, social, and professional settings. The lack of empathy can be one of the clearest signs of emotional immaturity, and it often manifests in ways that prevent an individual from truly understanding or caring about the needs, feelings, and perspectives of others. At its core, a lack of empathy indicates a disconnection from the emotional experiences of others. It is not just about being uninterested in other people's emotions. It's a fundamental inability or unwillingness to recognize the emotional states of others and to respond appropriately. When someone lacks empathy, they may come across as cold, indifferent, or even callous. They may dismiss the struggles of those around them, fail to offer comfort when someone is in distress, or worse, take pleasure in the suffering or misfortune of others. This lack of emotional resonance can create a barrier to genuine human connection and prevent the development of trust and mutual respect. Empathy is essential for building meaningful relationships. It allows us to offer comfort to friends in times of grief, provide encouragement to those struggling with self-doubt, and celebrate the successes of those we care about. Without empathy, relationships become transactional rather than relational. When someone cannot connect with another person's emotional state, the bond between them is weakened and the relationship lacks depth. For instance, in a romantic relationship, empathy is what allows partners to support one another during difficult times, offer understanding in moments of frustration, and communicate in ways that build emotional intimacy. A partner who lacks empathy may fail to notice when the other is upset, become dismissive of their feelings, or offer solutions before fully understanding the emotional context. In friendships and familiar relationships, a lack of empathy can lead to feelings of isolation, loneliness, and neglect. Imagine trying to explain your feelings to someone who doesn't listen or who seems uninterested in understanding your experience. The result is a relationship built on miscommunication and frustration. The person who lacks empathy may brush off your emotional experiences, invalidating your feelings, or may fail to offer the support you need. Over time, this leads to emotional distance as one person feels unheard, unseen, and uncared for. This emotional disconnect can cause deep harm, eroding trust and weakening the foundation of the relationship. Beyond personal relationships, a lack of empathy also has serious consequences in the workplace. In a professional environment, empathy fosters collaboration, understanding, and effective teamwork. When team members empathize with each other, they are more likely to listen actively, offer constructive feedback, and work together towards common goals. An empathetic leader is one who listens to the concerns of their team, understands the challenges their employees face, and strives to create an environment that values and supports each individual's well-being. On the other hand, leaders and colleagues who lack empathy are less likely to inspire loyalty or motivate others effectively. When someone in a leadership position is unable to understand the struggles and needs of their team, it can lead to high levels of frustration, disengagement, and turnover. Employees may feel undervalued, disconnected, or unsupported, leading to a toxic workplace culture. For instance, a manager who dismisses the concerns of their employees, offers no emotional support during stressful times, or fails to acknowledge their hard work contributes to a negative environment where morale is low and trust is broken. A lack of empathy in leadership stifles communication, reduces productivity, and creates a sense of alienation among team members. Even in broader societal contexts, the absence of empathy can lead to greater division, misunderstanding, and conflict. In a world that is increasingly interconnected, our ability to empathize with others, particularly those who are different from ourselves, is essential for creating a more compassionate and harmonious society. When we lack empathy for people from different backgrounds, cultures, or beliefs, we are more likely to engage in discriminatory behavior, perpetuate stereotypes, and contribute to social polarization. Without empathy, it becomes easier to dehumanize others, dismiss their struggles, or fail to see the validity of their experiences. The root causes of a lack of empathy can vary. Some individuals may have experienced childhood trauma or neglect, which can impair their ability to develop empathy. Others may have grown up in environments where emotions were dismissed or invalidated, leading them to shut off their own emotional responses and, in turn, become disconnected from the emotions of others. In some cases, a lack of empathy may stem from deep-seated insecurity or self-centeredness, where the individual's own needs and desires take precedence over the well-being of others. This can create a sense of entitlement and a disregard for how their actions impact those around them. A lack of empathy can also be a result of intellectualization, where a person over-intellectualizes or rationalizes their own behavior and that of others without considering the emotional impact of their actions. In this case, the person may focus solely on facts and logic, missing the emotional nuances of human interaction. While logical reasoning is important, it becomes limiting when it excludes emotional awareness. True wisdom comes from integrating both emotional and intellectual intelligence, recognizing that emotions are just as valid and important as facts. The good news is that empathy is not an innate trait. It can be developed and cultivated over time. Building empathy begins with active listening and making an intentional effort to understand the emotional experiences of others. It requires being present in the moment, acknowledging the feelings of others without judgment, and responding in a way that shows care and concern. Empathy also involves putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, trying to imagine what they are going through, and responding with compassion. It is about recognizing the humanity in others and offering kindness, support, and understanding. Furthermore, empathy requires vulnerability. It requires allowing ourselves to feel deeply, to be open to the experiences of others, and to acknowledge our own emotions as well. When we open ourselves up to empathy, we create space for connection, healing, and mutual respect. In a world that often feels disconnected, empathy is the thread that binds us together, reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles or triumphs. It is through empathy that we build the foundation for meaningful relationships, create supportive communities, and foster a culture of compassion. In every area of life, change is inevitable. From personal growth and relationships to societal progress and technological advancement, evolution is a fundamental part of the human experience. However, some individuals actively resist this process, unwilling to adapt, learn, or change in response to new challenges or insights. The refusal to evolve is one of the clearest signs of emotional stagnation and intellectual immaturity. It can hinder personal development, strain relationships, and prevent individuals from thriving in a rapidly changing world. At its core, the refusal to evolve is a rejection of growth. Growth, by its very nature, requires change, whether it's changing our beliefs, our behaviors, or our attitudes. But for some people, this process is uncomfortable, threatening, or even terrifying. The fear of the unknown, the security of the status quo, or a deep-seated reluctance to leave behind outdated ideas or patterns can all contribute to a refusal to evolve. Rather than confronting the discomfort of change, these individuals choose to stay where they are, clinging to old beliefs or habits, even when they no longer serve them or the world around them. The refusal to evolve is often driven by fear. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, and fear of vulnerability are common barriers to change. When someone is afraid of being judged or exposed, they may resist evolving because it requires them to take risks that challenge their self-image, their comfort zone, or their established way of life. This fear of stepping outside familiar boundaries can be paralyzing. For instance, a person who has always relied on certain defense mechanisms may refuse to adopt healthier coping strategies because the emotional vulnerability that comes with change feels too overwhelming. Similarly, someone who has been successful using a particular method or approach may refuse to explore new techniques or ideas, fearing that trying something new may lead to failure or reveal shortcomings. This resistance to evolution often manifests in stubbornness, defensiveness, and closed-mindedness. When presented with new ideas, feedback, or perspectives, individuals who refuse to evolve may reject them outright, not out of rational consideration, but because these new concepts challenge their existing worldview. They become entrenched in their beliefs, unwilling to entertain the possibility that there might be a better way of doing things or thinking about the world. This mental rigidity prevents growth by keeping them stuck in the past, unable to adjust to the evolving demands of life and the world around them. On a personal level, the refusal to evolve is particularly harmful. Growth is essential for becoming a more balanced, self-aware, and resilient individual. Without it, people remain trapped in old patterns of thinking and behavior, unable to break free from past mistakes or move beyond limiting beliefs. For example, someone who refuses to confront their own emotional issues may continue to engage in destructive behaviors, repeating the same mistakes over and over again. They might hold on to old grudges, unable to forgive, or they may avoid taking responsibility for their actions, blaming others instead of looking within. In relationships, the refusal to evolve can create a toxic dynamic. Personal growth is essential for maintaining healthy, fulfilling relationships, whether they're romantic, familiar, or platonic. When one person refuses to evolve, it places a strain on the relationship because they are unable or unwilling to meet the other person where they are emotionally, mentally, or socially. A partner who refuses to change or grow may find themselves stuck in negative patterns, repeatedly having the same arguments or struggling with unresolved issues. Similarly, someone who resists evolving might become complacent, no longer putting in the effort to nurture and deepen the relationship. They may take their partner for granted, neglecting their needs or failing to communicate effectively. Over time, this lack of growth can lead to resentment, emotional distance, and the eventual breakdown of the relationship. In a professional setting, the refusal to evolve is equally detrimental. The world of work is constantly changing, whether it's through new technologies, evolving markets, or shifting societal values. In today's fast-paced, competitive environment, adaptability is key to success. Individuals who refuse to evolve may find themselves left behind as others innovate, grow, and adapt to new challenges. For instance, someone who refuses to learn new skills, embrace technological advancements, or change their work habits may struggle to stay relevant in their field. This unwillingness to evolve can stifle their career growth, limit opportunities, and eventually lead to professional stagnation. Colleagues and managers may begin to view them as outdated or uncooperative, which can harm their reputation and hinder their career advancement. Furthermore, the refusal to evolve can have a broader societal impact. On a larger scale, progress depends on the willingness of individuals and communities to evolve, to embrace new ideas and solutions to old problems. Social change often requires confronting deeply ingrained beliefs and structures, which can be uncomfortable and challenging. People who resist these changes may hold on to prejudices, outdated social norms, or harmful practices that perpetuate inequality, injustice, or discrimination. By refusing to evolve, they become obstacles to progress, preventing society from addressing critical issues such as climate change, inequality, or access to education and healthcare. The refusal to evolve at a societal level perpetuates division and stagnation, while the willingness to evolve opens the door to a more inclusive, equitable, and forward-thinking world. Interestingly, the refusal to evolve can sometimes be rooted in a deep-seated sense of pride or insecurity. For some individuals, changing their mind or admitting that they were wrong feels like a threat to their sense of identity or self-worth. They may feel that evolving or adapting means they have failed in some way, or that their past decisions were somehow invalidated. This fear of being perceived as weak, foolish, or inconsistent can prevent them from embracing growth. However, true strength lies in the ability to acknowledge one's mistakes, learn from them, and move forward with greater wisdom. The refusal to evolve is often a defense mechanism that protects the ego, but in doing so, it keeps the individual from experiencing the true freedom and empowerment that comes with growth and change. It's important to recognize that evolution does not require drastic changes overnight, nor does it mean abandoning all aspects of one's identity or values. Personal growth is a gradual process, a continuous unfolding of new insights and perspectives. Evolution means being open to learning, to questioning old assumptions, and to trying new things even when they feel uncomfortable. It means embracing vulnerability, taking risks, and allowing ourselves to grow into better versions of ourselves. Evolution requires self-awareness and humility, the ability to recognize when we are stuck, when we need to change, and when we need to challenge ourselves. As we reflect on the 6 signs of a person who refuses to grow, we can see how deeply these traits, emotional defensiveness, blame culture, stubbornness in the face of evidence, lack of empathy, and refusal to evolve undermine personal development, relationships, and our ability to thrive in an ever-changing world. These behaviors don't just limit the individual who exhibits them, they create ripple effects, affecting families, friendships, workplaces, and even communities at large. The refusal to grow is often driven by fear of vulnerability, fear of being wrong, and fear of change. But growth, while uncomfortable at times, is essential for creating deeper connections, achieving greater success, and contributing to the well-being of society. Embracing change, listening to others, evolving our beliefs and actions, and cultivating empathy are not just acts of personal transformation, they are acts of courage and strength. It takes real wisdom to face the discomfort of change and to be willing to challenge one's own assumptions. The power to grow lies in our ability to be open to new perspectives, to acknowledge our mistakes and to learn from them. Each step we take toward evolution, both personally and collectively, has the potential to foster more meaningful relationships, a more compassionate society, and a life filled with purpose and progress. So, as we move forward, let us challenge ourselves to break free from the barriers of defensiveness, blame, stubbornness, and emotional disconnection. Let us evolve not just for ourselves, but for the people we love, the communities we serve, and the world we live in. By choosing to grow, we unlock the best version of ourselves, and in doing so, we become part of the force that drives humanity toward a brighter, more compassionate future.